Well, hello everyone. I'm not quite sure what time of day it is, but it's very nice to be here with you. My name is John Griffiths. I'm the Creative Director of Spring Research, and today I'd like to share with you a product which is just hot off the starting blocks. It's called Moments, but it's the reason I want to talk to you about it is not just because it's mobile, it's central to it, but because of the way in which it addresses context in a way in which I think research has not addressed context before. So I hope that gets the discussion started. Now, I'm going to be laying into research here. I know researchers like to do that, and I'm going to do it again. Traditional market research it can often be very two-dimensional, and a lot of what we capture, the data we capture, can frankly be irrelevant, particularly when context becomes important. It's very easy, we're very used to the idea of looking at people in detail, doing segmentation in terms of the personality types that we're identifying, but we tend to be dealing with individuals and then aggregate up, but we focus on people. As far as examining the environments within which customer and consumer decision-making is done, we don't really look at that, or when we do, we almost use the people to access it. We focus on the people rather than what's around them. So we have masses of data on decision-making, but the question is that telling us enough, and what is it really telling us? I love this slide. There's an elephant in the room, and the elephant in the room for research is context. It's something which research, as I'm going to explain, has not only not addressed, it's basically something that, like the elephant in the room, we've walked around and pretended it isn't really there, because in so many different ways we've basically ignored it. Let me take the all-too-common focus group. Does it really matter if you're running the focus group in a viewing facility, or in a hotel room, or in a private home, or, for that matter, when one has a hall test, when one goes into this booming empty hall and you bring people in and ask questions? What effect is that environment having on the way people answer the questions that we ask them, or the things we ask them to do? Worse still, what has that got to do with the context in which they might have seen advertising or used a product and so on? Is there any relationship between the two? And of course, that's a rather uncomfortable question because we don't really want to answer it. The assumption is that we can collect the data anyway, right? Now, I'm not here just to turn my guns on focus groups, because simply, if I was to walk through some of these other areas, I've mentioned hall tests already, but if I was to look at the link test, we evaluate advertising by asking people to look at a screen or to simply sit in a facility and to look at advertising completely far away from the context in which people normally look at advertising. Street surveys, of course, is no better, and so therefore for the vast majority of quant research, offline, again, context is something which we don't really want to talk about. And I could look at telephone research where we can't even see where the people are. And of course, given that the whole context of our event in the last 24 hours has been about mobile, to what extent are we understanding where people are when we talk to them using a mobile phone, or when we administer surveys using a mobile phone? Digital was going to save everything. But of course, digital research ignores context, in the sense that it assumes that the only context is the online context. So if we're looking at an online live focus group, or whether we are doing asynchronous with bulletin boards, and frankly with MROPs, we assume that the online context is what's important. And so the people who are participating, they may be at home, they may be at their desks at work, they may be on the move. But from that point of view, apparently it doesn't matter. They can answer our questions, they can participate wherever they are, and it's irrelevant. I have an abiding memory of one of the first times that I was doing live focus groups, and being quite startled to discover that the people who I was working with in a live group, not only were they in different cities, in arguably different countries, but I then discovered that as they were responding to the advertising clips that I was showing them, they were not alone. They had kids in the household who were joining in with them. And I suddenly realized that actually I had no grip on the context, because all that was happening was I assumed that the only context was the people immediately around in the virtual room. So online seems to have been working with the same blind spot, the elephant in the room. We've continued to walk around it. Now, we do know that identity and experience is fluid and changes. We do know this. This is something we've actually studiedly ignored. And as we started to debate this at Spring, we are blessed with having young researchers who are often well-versed in social sciences, who've studied these areas, and someone immediately perked up and said, Irving Goffman, you should be reading Goffman. And Goffman's point is that we wear different masks at different times. We have different scripts. And so therefore these things change in relation to our social context. And the wonderful word he came up with is dramaturgy. So once we looked at Goffman, it made us think, how can we start to identify these different masks or scripts or roles and to understand how they're different? This is almost the level on from need states, which simply says, how am I feeling? This is actually saying the words that I choose, the way that I behave, is fundamentally different depending on where I am. So instead of defining internal characteristics like personality, the idea is to say, can we look at these individual moments? Can we look at these masks? Can we try to understand this in this context? So, you can see where we're going on this. We wanted to look at decision-making in real time, to define the moments that people have which drive how they are using products and services. Now, I don't want to be too harsh here, because of course research does address context, and it does it in two particular ways. I'll start with the tin can, which is basically, do you remember when? The first thing we tend to do is to say, I want to put you back in that context and to remind you how you felt. The danger, of course, with this is that we are doing this when people are away from the context, and we are entirely dependent on how accurate their memory is and what they're willing and able to tell us. And so that's the first way in which we do it, using just straight recall. The second way, and this is why mobile is so important and central to this discussion, is to use interruption with a mobile phone survey, which is the latest weapon of choice. The problem I've got with this is that as soon as you use a mobile and ask a whole series of questions, what you've done is simply to transplant the mechanism of the survey or asking questions and to drop it straight into the immediate context in a way which potentially, if you overload it, takes the person out of their context and puts them into an answering mode which almost changes the mood, changes what they're doing. And so we have to be very careful. And so this is my concern about a lot of mobile research, in that it isn't addressing context, it's actually taking people straight out of it. So this is the solution we've come up with and what we're working with in Moments, which is, can we let people take their own pulses quickly and simply with a very simple set of questions, which is so simple, we almost do it without waking them up. Here are the initial questions. Where are you? Who are you with? What are you doing? How are you feeling? We give them the chance to take a photo with the phone, and we do give an open field, so if there's anything else they want to say, they can do it. But the argument with this is that by asking simple questions and to ask someone simply to answer that as a way of capturing the context, lays down something very powerful we can then come back to and access. Now, there's a whole lot of analytics behind this, which I don't have time to take you through, and I'd rather not, because some of this is, as you'll appreciate, proprietary. But what we're doing here is to show you an example of what happens if we have worked with a number of people, if we have worked over a period of days or weeks, and we then map some of these core questions onto it. And it allows us to build a map of core moments, which is defined in the customer's own words. You'll appreciate that the size of the bubbles, it relates to how frequent they are and how many people are subscribing to it. Now, the really important thing, this is what gets brand managers jumping up and down, and they are, is where does the brand fit within it? Because the danger is, if we're simply using the recall technique, then we're too far away. Once we've built up a map of context, then it is appropriate for us to be able to ask, does the brand feel as if it fits, or doesn't? Does the brand fit? And what makes a brand fit better or worse? And there's even a variant on this where we can start to look at different product formats and whether they fit the situation or whether they don't fit the situation. And by doing this, we can build a map of brand relevance and opportunity. So this chart shows very briefly how we might map brands straight over the top of the chart which I showed you already, so we can actually see what fits and what doesn't fit, and to use that as a way of building an understanding of where brands have traction. So the idea here is that we build a map of core moments which are defined by importance, context, and brand opportunity. And then this is the thing that we do with the mobile. And then we come back to it. I should explain that the way in which we do this is to use online diaries as a way of taking this map of core moments and to then overlay with self-completion of diaries and with self-completion of questionnaires a week later, 2 weeks later, a detailed account of moments which give insights into brands and communication opportunities. And because of the output is obviously tailored to individual projects. And of course, we're not doing this with any old thing. We do, of course, have an app for it. Doesn't everyone these days? But the point here is that we have an app which allows us to address the context in as non-invasive, non-interruptive way as possible. So here's the overview. A mobile app, contextual data collection, which still gives us the opportunity to collect open-ended data. We're using online diaries with in-depth moderation, and then we can do depth interviews, usually by phone, to delve further into the experiences where we can overlay what's happening there. And it allows us to define moments using consumers' own words and to understand the range of relevant physical and emotional feelings around the moments. So hopefully that summarized where we're at. We've got a couple of projects going through the works. You'll appreciate that I can't really talk about those at the moment, but that this allows us to look at context in a way in which we haven't really quite before, and I think we're scratching the surface. I'd be very interested to get questions and feedback from you about how moments and context can be addressed by research in the future. Thanks very much for listening.